Which begs the question, if there was a cast mold on the material world, how much are you bought into it? The dynamics of, if there's some abrasion on stuff, everything has abrasion. Everything has got a surface that has interacted with other surfaces, and the more that you electrify it and put it up against like a screen of induction that can read registers of spectrum that are gonna cataclysmically show like a chemtrail of what it's been up to, such as in teen movies when they put ultraviolet light on like people's beds. Haha. This is what Scarecrow does, this one villain, and he just puts like this air that you don't know when you're breathing it, and then all of a sudden something bad happens with a cloud, like the clown It having a red balloon. Well, now you just see like a cloud, and then everything bad starts happening, and all of a sudden this a-hole pops out, and it's as though everyone was wearing like a metal fixture, and at some point everything a metal fixture is equivalent just to like an oil based if you're crafty, and this Scarecrow is one of the craftiest in chemical byproducts of whatnot. So the splitting image of the casings of an environment being enveloped or submerged is representative of being submerged in, the gravity waves, because those are always propagating, as opposed to a suspension of any interaction having to interact with the surface and mobility through camouflage of smoke screens and gas lights. Some of the most intricate things are unknown, but the discreteness of nature is how you can decipher if it is a smoke screen or a gas light. Adding in a freeze frame that is really small amount of time in between a flash of light is going to be a pattern that looks like it is a magic trick, when even though it isn't. Just because lighting is an effect that is seen over a disjoint when it comes to submerge in a fluid, the path of least resistance when light is being treated as a material, its holographic image projection from outside of the fluid looks disjoint. Anything not submerged in a fluid is suspension, falling through space, giving off these odd imageries, which in that case, even if it is, it's just like a encasing of the environment of the room. And that's unique because flipped inside out, it's given a story of that object that can be utilized just as well as like a pendulum swing, with its momentum being a reading of barometric pressures. Which begs the question, if there was a cast mold on the material world, how much are you bought into? And then just like understanding what a hard cut is, and like wheat is really good because it's known to be thrashed, and so it has like an identity where it knows how to get thrashed. When you're making like foods with wheat, you're gonna show an identity even in digestion that it sits well when being thrashed. And so one thing that does hard cuts is malt liquor, and it will go through and eat through what's ever inside your stomach and hit you hard. But if you're eating wheat snacks with malt liquor, then it'll sit well in the complex. And so just the division of genes in the complex. So in order not to be a cannibal or another statistic, it's better to be important, and how you can be important is if you're recognized inside of like Washington DC, if they can understand how many people are like rocket scientists. So what is kabuki theater to a kangaroo court? It'd be like a zoo having a circus come in and thinking all the animals are ready and have been tamed. By fabricating and fudging, you can change reality even if you're not trying to. Actually, reality has to change, and that's what the arrow of time is. But in confusing what time is, a lot of people can have it taken from them, such as spending time in a cage. Online is the articulation of what is called a incel. If you're captive to it, are different than what an inbred is. I don't want to be an inbred or an incel, but I do understand how they can be easily confused and misconstrued through camouflage of smoke screens and gas lights, where collagen is what keeps your tissues and your muscles together. It's just the interplay of patterns and then collages, the interplay of like blurring or shaking are similar but as different in comparison to harmonics with radiation. So a clone can never be a real McCoy, but it can be infinitely similar to one. And the more that you have offshoots and can confuse what's real and what isn't, this distortion of intolerance is like how qubits or computers flip switches on and off in order to mirror design. The inverse is able to vertically integrate. It's the most demented, tolerable thing you can think of is if you need a signature to be a civilian. One way that you would have to do this is in the judicial system if you've broken a law. If you've broken a law, you'll have to get fingerprinted and identified before being thrown into a cage. How many things would lead to that? Well, one, of course, would be jaywalking. And how many people would jaywalk and be thrown under a bus or being hit by one? If you're hit by a bus and then you have to go into a hospital, you would need to be identified and signatured in order to receive any assistance. How could these things be used as a target and labeled is no different than having to be a statistic instead of characterized. If you can dehumanize people and treat them as a statistic, it's going to be almost as though they're a cell inside of a clone. And how important is a clone to a cell is just how a human is to a globalist. It's just like, what's a tuning fork to a circuit? It's the difference of a harmonic and then a radiation wave function. In terms of salt, for example, if you put salt on a slug or ice, it'll substantially show that it's burning it, or you'll feel a burn. However, it's different than putting a magnifying glass up to a slug or ice, and that will burn with radiation, versus the harmonics of a salt emulating a burn. When things are loosely defined and then highly regulated, you can virtually invent things out of thin air. I think poetically there would be something like the sympathy of a clone. The sympathy of a clone. You know how robots and computers, they don't have any sympathy? But what if a clone is looking at a graveyard? Is it looking at it as an excitation? If it's the difference between a graveyard and a crypt,